Morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are, and welcome to the latest edition of Free Thought Hour. So it's welcome to Tercia, my regular co-host. Lovely to see you. How the devil are you today?
I'm being angelic. I'm sitting in front of the heater, so I'm not completely in hell. It's nice and cold. We haven't had our first snow yet. Do you know, John, we had a tornado in the KZN area on Tuesday. A full-on tornado. It wreaked havoc in just a town just north of Durban, Tongaat.
Mm-hmm.
It was massive, but fortunately, where I am, we just have pleasant cold weather. We've had our first winter rains, no snow. I have seemed to be being able to avoid this horrible whatever's going around that you've
Yeah.
also been suffering from,
I
and that I
haven't.
know
I'm
numerous
still.
people here.
Yeah.
So touch wood. So far so good.
Good.
And it's nice to be here, and I'm glad you on the mend, getting better
Yeah.
slowly.
Yes.
But hang in there, John.
Slowly but surely. So, and our guest tonight is not exactly a neighbour, but he's in the same county on the south coast, and it's Paul Clark. Welcome, Paul. How the devil are you?
Hello, I'm very well. Yeah, good. How are you, John? How are you, Tercia?
Well,
It's lovely to meet you.
yes. I've got the COVID or whatever it is, and it's difficult to shake, but I'm recovering. So, anyway, you're an interesting person, Paul, because you and I had a chat, and you revealed something about yourself. But I usually tell my guests in the pre-show chat, don't talk to me now because I want it to come out in the show. And if you tell me stuff beforehand, I'll think that was in the show and it wasn't. And then, so I'll get all confused. So Paul, tell us about yourself. You're an author now.
I'm an author. I used to be a teacher.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm the son of teachers. Both my parents were teachers. My dad he eventually became a headmaster. And I grew up in Coventry and Manchester, but I've lived most of my adult life in Eastbourne, right on the south coast of England. So I became an English language teacher. I graduated in history. But I didn't become a history teacher. My dad wanted me to become a primary teacher. He said I'd be good at it. But I became a teacher of English as a foreign language, mostly because I wanted to see the world. My ambition was to live in Paris, drink French wine on the left bank, write poetry, and chase French girls. But it never quite happened. I lived in Italy instead, and I had a couple of years there.
Italian girls.
Italian girls are lovely.
Italian wine too.
So, sorry, what was that, John?
Italian wine as well.
Oh, Italian wine and Italian food. I mean,
yes,
it's a great life living in Italy. I absolutely loved it. Then I came back to England, and then I went to Thailand, and I lived in Bangkok for a couple of years. Got married, had a child over there, and then came back to the UK, and I've lived in Eastbourne ever since. So I worked as a language teacher and became a teacher trainer and a manager, and eventually ended up as the owner of a big language school in Eastbourne, which me and my partner, we sold it just before the pandemic, which was magnificent timing.
Yes, absolutely.
Because language schools were slaughtered by the pandemic. I mean, nobody could travel.
No.
And they rely on people traveling to the UK. So we did quite well to get out when we did. And then after we sold the school, I started writing. I wouldn't say I write full time. I write and I do gardening and I go for walks on the downs. I do a bit of teaching every now and then.
What do you teach now? So Paul, firstly, it's amazing how, if I listen to you, both my parents were teachers. My father became a school headmaster. I did English literature, and history was. I didn't study it at university, but it was my favorite subject. And I now have a little homeschool or tutoring centers, so I find many parallels. I had I'd never lived in Italy, but I had my husband knows about this, so I can say it. I had an Italian lover when I was an au pair in Greece. So there's so many similarities.
So you're fond of Italy then?
Well, I've never been to Italy, but besides,
Italy is an amazing place, and Milan. When you speak to Italians and you say, "I used to live in Italy," and they say, "Where do you live?" "I lived in Milan." They go, "What? What do you live there for?" But it was a great place to live, and all the trains in the north of Italy go to Milan. So if you want to go to the beach, go to the beach. If you want to go to Venice, go to Firenze, go to Rome. You can go skiing for the day. It was just fantastic.
How long was this? How many years did you spend living in Milan?
2 years.
It's not long enough. But tell me, did you also? I want to the Unsure podcast.
Yeah, I was on that.
I'll have to check it out. Welcome. Thank you for joining us, the Unsure podcast. I will be checking you out on my podcast list tonight. So, I presume you speak Italian as well? Did you learn?
Parlo italiano. Sì. Yeah.
Okay,
I learned Italian totally by ear. I never studied it at all. And my students used to complain that I was learning Italian faster than they were learning English.
You obviously have an ear for it, for language.
I like languages. My mum was a French teacher. And when I was a small child, when my parents wanted to speak to each other so we didn't understand, they'd speak French. And then when my brother went to secondary school, he could join in and I couldn't. And when I got to learn French, I was the most motivated pupil ever. I absolutely loved French. And, it was my strongest subject. I think history was my favorite subject, but French was my strongest subject, definitely.
History is my favorite subject too. But I want to ask you about your time in Bangkok. Two things. Did you get married to
a Thai? Yeah.
Yes. So
I was a naughty boy. She was one of my students in England, and when she went home, I went chasing after her.
Well, that's naughtier now than it used to be, because
it is. I mean, she's older than me, so it
wasn't, yes. Well, there you go.
That naughty.
No, indeed, it was legal, as they say. But it
we
reminds
got married in Bangkok, and our first baby was born in Bangkok. And we were kind of expecting to live in Bangkok for a long time. But then my old school invited me back to England, and I came back.
So,
yes.
How long did you end up living in Bangkok?
Just over about 2.5 years, something like that.
So it's about the same. So I want to ask you about, if you don't mind, about your marriage to a Thai woman, and living in the UK and having a child that some people, despite me hating the phrase, would say is mixed race, which is so my brother, who lived in Yorkshire for a good number of a decade, and now lives in the UK, he married a Chinese woman, and they have a little girl. And it's so funny to see how people in my community in South Africa respond to this white man being married to a person of Thai or Chinese origin. Was that something that you had to deal with ever? Or was it
I
common
don't know.
enough in the UK?
I'm kind of, I don't care what people think about that issue.
Can I join in here, because I've got two daughters who are half African.
Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah. When just before I went to Thailand, I went to meet 3 friends, and one of them was a teacher, and she said to me, just before I said goodbye to her, she said, "Mixed marriages breed problem children." And I was furious with her. I've never spoken to her since. And my kids are fine. I think my older daughter will occasionally say, in very great pride, "I'm not white," you know.
That's exactly the type that's why I asked that question, because it shows up the false presuppositions that we have about what makes a healthy individual.
Yeah,
And what makes healthy children is to what makes a child healthy is to have at least one parent, preferably both, it doesn't matter what gender they are even, who has emotional maturity and guides them along the way. That's what makes a
yeah,
child or
yeah.
children
And there's
healthy.
even
It's
I saw a documentary on TV years ago. It was a woman, I think she was of Pakistani heritage, who was married to a white Brit. And the documentary was, "Is it better to be mixed race?"
Oh,
And
oh,
what she was saying was, any animal breeder will
yeah,
tell you
yes,
that a mixed animal, a mongrel dog, will be healthier than a pedigree dog.
absolutely.
And the same is true of horses, and the same is true of any animal. And she says it's true of human beings too.
Of course it is. Yes,
And
there's such a
she pointed to Brazil, which
ah,
is a very ethnically mixed
mm,
yes.
society, where you've
mhm,
got people of all kinds of mixtures in all social classes. And she said the evidence from Brazil is that people of mixed race, particularly first generation mixed race,
yeah.
tend to be healthier than
Mm.
people of single race.
Well, it's
I
not
mean, if you
just
look at Ashkenazi Jews,
yes,
they've been fairly inbred for 1,000 years, and
yeah,
they've got diseases like Tay-Sachs disease that they
yeah,
suffer from
yeah.
because of this.
And in Pakistan, where it's common to marry your cousin, there's a lot of genetic diseases. But as a retired biology teacher, I want to say that it's not just about healthier, because there's something called hybrid vigor, which
Oh,
means yes, which means that the attributes of mixed race creatures, and that includes humans, are are generally more advantageous than those of the pure breed. So, if you look at adults who have started to achieve, whether it's in athletics or academics or in the media, there's a high preponderance of mixed races.
Yeah, and you get a lot of mixed race English footballers
Mm,
who have got black heritage.
mm.
yeah.
If you look at the Nigerian football team,
Yes.
a lot of them have got white heritage.
Yes. 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 Yes.
So,
Anyway,
Well. That
can
was an interesting rabbit trail to go down.
yeah, yes, absolutely. But can we now focus on your book,
yeah,
Paul? Because this sounds. I've made a banner for you, and
yeah,
this sounds interesting to me because you've obviously come on a journey yourself here. It sounds to me. I haven't read it obviously yet, but it sounds to me. Although you did offer me a copy, so I might take you up on that. It sounds to me as though there's not autobiographical, but sort of personal philosophical experience incorporated in it. So here's the title of it. It's called the Omega Course, and you can get it from that address, and I'm sure from Amazon and all good bookshops.
yeah, yeah. Okay. I'm unlike some of your guests in that I don't have a religious experience to draw
Ah,
on. My parents were both atheists, and my dad occasionally actually sent me to church. I was a member of the Scouts when I was about 10 or 11, and every month there would be church parade, and I definitely wanted to get out of it. And my dad said, "No, you go along." I think he just thought he probably wanted to get rid of me for the day. And he would say, "Do you good, hear the other point of view." So
He
I
was
did
brilliant, your dad.
occasionally
Your
go to
dad was.
church, probably hated every minute of it. I think it was brilliant reverse psychology by my dad. Um, I've always wanted to write. All my life, I wanted to write.
mhm.
And intermittently, I wanted to write a book about Christianity. And the first time I really wanted to write when I was a teenager. And do you remember I think it was a Zeffirelli drama of the life of Jesus. You may remember
I remember that. I remember that well.
Starred
I
Robert
remember
Powell as
that.
Jesus. Yeah.
Oh, that one. Yes, Robert Powell. Yes.
Yeah. I was watching that with my little sister, and there was the bit where the massacre of the innocents happened. And my little sister was really upset by that. And I sat there feeling very angry because I thought, well, it never happened. And it annoyed me that this was presented as fact, when almost certainly nothing of the kind happened. And so this desire to write a book about Christianity has always been there. I'm not religious. I've never been religious, but I've always been fascinated by religion, because it's one of the great motivators of human beings.
Yes.
You know, throughout history and today, you know, people will give their lives for their religion, and
Yes,
they will take lives as well
Yes,
for their religion in some cases.
I like what Bertrand Russell said. He said, I wouldn't die for my religion or for my beliefs because I might be wrong.
That's very true. That's very true. Yeah. So this desire was sort of always there. And then one day it just hit me, why don't I do it in a novel? And my models were two books which I love. I don't know if you've read them. One is Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, and the other is Sophie's World. Have you read them?
No, but I'm aware of them.
Okay. So Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance is the story of a philosophy professor who is recovering from a nervous breakdown.
Yeah.
And he goes on a journey with his son, who has psychological problems too, on their motorbike and with a couple of friends. And he tells the story of his breakdown and his recovery. And he also goes through the history of Western philosophy because he's a philosophy professor. And it's a brilliant book. And there are moments in the book. I remember he has his past self, who he calls Phaedrus. And the moment that Phaedrus appeared, about halfway through the book, it creeped me out. I was really creeped out by it. It was magnificent. So I like the way he mixed fiction and non-fiction, and he melded them together. And the other book is Sophie's World. Sophie's World is a young adult novel about this teenage girl who starts getting mysterious letters from a man called Armando Knox. And it's a history of Western philosophy. Again, it's doing the same thing. In some ways, you know, in the Me Too era, that book hasn't aged very well. You know, you've got a teenage girl who's getting letters from a middle-aged man.
Yes.
But it is a good book. I bought it for my daughter when she was my oldest daughter, when she was about 12, 13, and she loved it. And she said it just blew her mind, the whole book. And it has a brilliant part where it becomes surreal. And Armando Knox and Sophie realize that they're just characters in a novel.
Oh.
And they wonder how they can get out of the novel and become real.
How
so
very
it becomes quite postmodern.
Yes.
Towards the end. But it's a brilliant book. So I thought, okay, why don't I do that? Why don't I have a story about a person? And it's someone who, they have a massive crisis in their life. What he does is the day after his driving test, he causes an accident in which somebody dies. And he's just devastated by this, and he's falling apart. And he meets a priest, a very kindly priest. And one of the things the priest suggests to him is, why don't you go on the Alpha course? Because the priest says, why don't you pray? He says, I can't pray, I don't believe. I want to believe, but I don't believe. And so he says, why don't you join the Alpha course, which is like ABC of Christianity.
I know, but Paul, can I ask you, did you choose so I come from a Christian background.
Okay.
And the moment I read that the title was Omega course,
yes.
I thought, there's a Christianity course.
Ding.
Yes.
Ta-da! Okay.
It's not a coincidence.
Good. So I wasn't really.
So it was quite interesting. I sent the book before publication, I sent the book to 2 Anglican priests who read the book. And one of them, she wrote very nice feedback. And she said, it was a bit unprofessional of that priest to suggest the Alpha Course straight away. You wouldn't do that. So I had to put later in the book, I put the priest saying, yeah, I shouldn't have done that. That was a bit unprofessional of
Ah.
so, but anyway, he goes on the Alpha Course, and one of the people he meets on the Alpha Course is a theology student. She's a student at university. She's from her dad is a very liberal Christian. Her mum is quite hardcore. And as happens with a lot of people when they study theology, it challenges her faith. Mm-hmm. And her faith is starting to collapse, partly because of the course and partly because of external events. One of her children, one of her friends has a child who's very ill. And she's wondering, how can God allow this to happen to this poor baby? Mm-hmm. So it's kind of the problem of evil is causing her faith to crumble. So her nickname is Omega B. Okay, I had to get that in somehow. So her nickname is Omega B, and she gives the protagonist an Omega course, which is kind of undermining the Alpha course. So that's how I put it all together. Yeah.
So it's the anti-Christian course.
Yeah, I mean, she is in the process of losing her faith. And what she's doing is she's giving them what she learned in her theology degree. Because a theology degree in a British university, it's proper academia.
Yes.
It's not Bible thumping, this is what you must believe. It's proper academia. Yes. It's looking at how the Bible came to be written, where the Israelites really came from, how Christianity started. And
many of the theology lecturers are atheists.
Yeah, but Ehrman is, of course, the most famous example.
Yes, but not in an English university.
But it's true.
Paul, I have two questions. Sorry, the first one is, did you do the Alpha course? I've never done it. I have no idea what it's about. I've heard a lot about it. So, so that's easy. Why did you ask these Anglican or the priest who said that it was unprofessional of your character to immediately suggest the Alpha course? Why would that be unprofessional? Did you think about asking that?
I didn't. We only had a brief correspondence, but I guess what she was saying was, if the priest is in counseling mode, they shouldn't go saving the soul. They should go looking after the person. That's what I guess is what she was saying.
Wow,
now, this is an Anglican priest, okay? A liberal Anglican priest. Yes. I suspect there are churches where they wouldn't take that attitude.
Yes.
They would, let's latch onto this person and save their soul.
Because if you save the soul, you save the person. You save the person. I don't know. Are you familiar with the Recovering from Religion organization?
I know, but on Twitter I follow people who talk about recovering from religion, and on podcasts like yours, I've heard about people who've been quite traumatized by evangelical religion. Yeah.
Not even just evangelical. I think it's only innocuous, tepid branches of Christianity and religion, like the Anglicans, that don't really traumatize people, So, but that's just my opinion. I want to just get back to the. You have the story that in story form tells the history of Christianity. What was the research that you did? Did you refer?
Yeah, I did a lot of research.
How did you go about doing that? Are you familiar with Dermot McCullough's series? Yeah. I was wondering whether that was. Did you make?
That's one of the books I read. I've been reading about it for years. It's an interest of mine, and I've got a big bookshelf full of books about the history of the Bible and the history of Christianity and so forth. So a lot of it was in there anyway. In fact, one of the things that kicked me into writing the book. Do you know Richard Elliott Friedman's book, Who Wrote the Bible?
I've heard of it. I have.
Okay,
I
it's
have
a
it
kind of.
I've never read it.
It's an exposition of the documentary hypothesis, which is that the book of Genesis wasn't written as a book, but it was probably about 3 documents that were woven together to form the book of Genesis. And then this is the same. This is true of many of the core books of the Bible. So when I read that book, I probably read it about 15 years ago, I thought, why doesn't everybody know this? And I feel everybody should know this, because it won't stop you being a Christian. You know, every Christian priest in the world has studied this. Well, not in the world, in Britain will have studied it, and it didn't stop them being a Christian. But it would stop you being a fundamentalist.
Yes.
You know, you can't be a fundamentalist if you know the history of the Bible.
But Paul, I'm speaking as a former Christian. So I was a devout evangelical fundamentalist Christian until I was 40. Although I would have never described myself as either fundamentalist or evangelical at that time, because I didn't know those terms. So I wouldn't have. Now I identify myself as that is what I was. But you said that the history of Christianity and you used the terms the history of Christianity and the history of the Bible. And would you agree with me if I said that those are actually 2 different stories?
Oh yeah.
That the Christian church has integrated into one story.
Yeah.
So it's 2 totally different strands of history. You agree with me on that? And then yes, go ahead, John.
Can I point out there is that the Christian church is not a monolith.
Yeah, but it's interesting. You mentioned Dermot McCullough's book, the History of Christianity. He doesn't start with the Jews.
No.
The first chapter of that book is about the Greeks. Because what he's saying essentially is that Christianity is a Greek take on Judaism. That the Greeks took what they wanted from Judaism and created that. Another book that comes to mind is Francesca
Stavrakopoulos.
Stavrakopoulos. Yeah. Okay. Francesca S. Okay.
Stavrakopoulos. Yes.
Yeah. She says that Christianity and Judaism are not biblical religions; they're post-biblical religions. And I think this is a very important point that she's making, that they've taken what's in the Bible and interpreted it and used it in their own way. But what's in the Bible wasn't written by Christians. I mean, I'm talking about the Old Testament. Wasn't written by Christians, and it wasn't written by Jews either. It was written by ancient Israelites.
That's it. And I would go so far as saying that even the New Testament probably was not written by what we would regard as Christians today, because the people who put the canon together and the people who wrote the letters and the stories that were eventually accepted as the New Testament, they would have, whoever wrote whichever part of the Gospel of according to Mark, I have serious doubts as to whether that person would have said, I am a Christian at the time of writing that text. So even that, I think, is a whole different kettle of fish.
Yes.
But I want to.
After that, of course, there was a heavy hand of an editor under the instruction of Emperor Constantine, under his rules. And at that point, some of the Gospels got dropped on the cutting room floor. The Gnostic Gospels never got included as part of the authentic canon, did they?
Sorry, Paul, you have to now step in here, because I need to point out that I think, John, you just made a very common mistake, as somebody who doesn't study Christianity, which I do in my spare time a little bit, it's the meeting that Constantine organized wasn't about the Bible and which books should go into the Bible.
It was about Christology.
It was about Christology. That the Bible is even later than Constantine.
Yes.
I'm not. I'm trying to think which book I was reading that said the canon evolved over time.
Yes.
And I would have thought long before Constantine, it was pretty much agreed what the canon was. You know, there were disputes about Revelation, for example, whether that should be included or not. But
maybe.
Which 4 Gospels should be included? I think long before Constantine, it was pretty much agreed that those 4 were the key Gospels.
But although Constantine died before his efforts came to fruition, he did set up the Council of Nicaea 1 and 2.
Yeah. Yes. And I think what he was trying to do there was he was basically knocking heads together and saying, can you agree, guys? Agree on a doctrine? And they did agree.
That was about the 2 natures of Jesus. Yeah. That was about, is he God and man, and they're equal and they don't mix? I love that in the documentary about the history of Christianity, Dermot McCulloch has these, he sits in a restaurant and he has a glass of wine and a glass of olive oil. And then he has, he says, so the one branch, I can never remember which patriarch said that, or which party maintained that the human and the God-like nature of Jesus is like water and oil, or wine and oil. They're in one glass, but they don't mix. And the other idea was that it's like water and vinegar. If you pour the 2 together, they will mix and both will become diluted. And it was such a heavy point of dispute that people literally killed one another. Who was it that was exiled to Egypt? Basically the guy that lost at the Council of Nicaea. It's not so fresh in my memory, but are you, just to get back to the story about the Greeks, the Bible or Christianity and being Greek, if you follow the Derek Myth Vision podcast, I don't know that one. You'd love it. Myth Vision podcast. His surname has slipped my mind now, but I just watched a documentary that he made with 2 academics who have the hypothesis that the entire story of Jesus is a sort of a Greek Christian rewriting of the Odyssey by Homer. And what they actually do, it's so fascinating, because what these 2 scholars actually do to give evidence to their hypothesis, they read from, the one sits and reads from the Odyssey in English, but he translates it as he reads from the Greek, like you or I would between French and Italian texts. And the other one sits and reads from the English New Testament. And they have 3 sets of criteria. It's which I can now not exactly rephrase. And it's in places and he also translates from the Greek New Testament to English. So it's not the translated Bible that the other scholar reads from. And the correlations, many sentences are exactly the same. So that's a very, very interesting idea, that the Greeks just took these texts and they took their mythology, they took Homer and the Odyssey, and they just tweaked it a little bit and off they go.
I guess they were using their idiom, weren't they?
Yeah.
They were translating the stories of Jesus into their idiom. I can believe that.
Yeah. Well, if you want to get an audience, then obviously you're going to need to appeal to what is familiar to them, and and that's why they incorporated all their previous mythologies and didn't make too many changes, because that wouldn't have been acceptable to the crowd that they were preaching to. So, Paul, tell us about your book experience so far, because I've written some books too, and I know that there's been a seismic upheaval in the book world, because what used to happen was an author. I mean, let's take, for example, Charles Dickens. He got his books published in a journal initially, didn't they? They were serials, and but they were financed by somebody else, by a publisher who gave him money to buy the property of the writing of him. And that is the traditional model, which has gone on for the last, I don't know how many centuries, since printing began, probably. But what you were required to do in those days was convince somebody who had a lot of money in a warehouse that they thought your book would sell, and then they would have a lot of 10,000 copies printed, store them in the warehouse, and push them out to bookshops. But that model has been completely upended by the digital printing technology.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
I mean, the traditional method for authors now is you get an agent.
yes.
You don't convince a publisher, you convince an agent.
Yes.
And I've been there, I've done that. Apparently, the average agent in the UK gets 3,000 unsolicited manuscripts sent to them every year, of which they'll probably select about 3. So when you send manuscripts to an agent, you literally have a 1 in 1,000 chance of getting selected, unless you're very, very lucky and you send the right thing to the right person, or unless you're very, very good. So the Omega Course wasn't my first book. My first book was a thriller. It's not really a political thriller, because the political thriller genre is about people uncovering a vast conspiracy. And my book isn't that. It's a thriller about politics. So I wrote this book, and I did the diligent thing, and I sent it to loads of agents. And eventually I got an agent, and I was thrilled. And he was great. He edited my book for free, because he would, get it from the royalties. And eventually he said, "Love your book, great book, but it's too long." And he said, I don't think I can sell it. So he said, instead of cutting it, turn it into a series. So I eventually did that. So halfway through doing that, unfortunately, my agent passed away.
Oh.
And his agency died with him. He was a one-man agency. And I thought, well, do I try again to get an agent? It's literally a 1 in 1,000 chance. And so I thought, no, blow it. I'll do the Omega course instead. So I wrote the Omega course. And then I was too busy. I had a day job. And I was very busy working on my day job. So they both sat there for a long time until I gave up my day job just before the pandemic.
Yeah.
And then I decided I won't bother with agents. I was impatient. I'll just self-publish, which these days is very easy.
Yes.
Any idiot can self-publish a book. It takes a genius to sell one.
Exactly. Yes.
Did you publish the first book? Did you ever?
I published the first book. So my first book was a series of books. It became a trilogy in the end. At first I was going to make it 2 books, and then eventually I thought, no, I'll make it 3 books.
Okay, and the title, is it also available on Amazon?
Yeah, they're all available on Amazon. So the first one is called The Price of Dreams, and it's the story of a young athlete in the Soviet Union who hates the communists, but he wants to be on the Soviet team in the Olympics. So he has a dilemma about what he's going to do. And then the second two books are about the post-communist chaos. He's from one of the ethnic minority republics in the Soviet Union. And in a lot of those places, the country just fell apart. You know, when they became independent, every little ethnic group wanted to separate from the main ethnic group. So the second book was called The Long Night of Chaos. And then the third book is called Day of the Long Knives, which is a mistake to give it that title, because if you Google it, you just get Night of the Long Knives, which is when Hitler killed all his rivals. So big mistake to call it that. But I sent an unsolicited copy of the second book to Neil Asherson. I don't know if you know Neil Asherson. He's one of the top writers about Eastern Europe. He was in Poland at the time of Solidarity, and he wrote books about Eastern Europe. And he liked the book. He liked it very much. And he wrote back to me, tell me about your background. How did you get such a feel for that part of the world? And I thought, bingo, I did my research.
Yeah. So if you wrote a book about American politics of the past decade, it would be a horror, whereas this was just a thriller, political thriller trilogy, not exactly horror. So you can make your next book about South African politics. I don't know if you.
Well, you're living in interesting times now, aren't you?
Absolutely, very much so. I want to get back to your Omega course. Is that so? You follow these two main characters. It's the.
There's essentially three main characters. There's the boy who has the accident, which causes someone to die. He's got a friend called Sophie, who later became his love interest. And then there's Omega B, the theology student whose faith is crumbling. And the relationship between the three. The main character finds the Omega course a bit of a challenge because he's not after truth, he's after redemption. Whereas his friend Sophie loves the Omega course because she wants to know the truth. And she's very happy to get one side from the Alpha course and the other side from Omega B, so that she can make her mind up about what she's going to believe. So it's following those three stories. And how the Omega course begins is in one of the sessions, B makes a throwaway remark. Someone says to her, where does theology stand on the question of evolution versus creation? And she just makes a throwaway remark, well, there's two creation stories in the Bible, so how can either of them be literally true? And then the other two ask her about that. And then she teaches them about the fact that many biblical stories in the Old Testament, there are two versions of it. There's two versions of Noah which are woven together. There's two versions. I think there are three versions of the plagues of Egypt.
There's three versions, yeah.
Yeah, which are woven together. There's two separate creation stories, etc., etc. And so she goes into the documentary hypothesis, and she goes into the things like the Exodus and how historical it is or not, as the case may be. So she does it through dialogue, and she sends them emails as well about these different things. And then they ask her about Jesus. And she gives the kind of the historian's viewpoint on Jesus, and explains how that viewpoint emerged sort of in the 19th and 20th centuries.
Paul, what's your opinion? What's your opinion on the term agnosticism?
Yeah, I think of it as, my opinion is, I'm an atheist. That's my opinion.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I could be wrong. I'm reading a very interesting book at the moment by an American guy called Stephen Tiger. It's called Doctrine Impossible. And he says it's quite reasonable to believe something that can't be proven. And in fact, he said all of us do that. We all have beliefs that can't be proven. I'll give you one of my beliefs that can't be proven. this country will be better off under a Labour government. Okay, that's my opinion. I can't prove it. I don't have access to an alternate universe in which there have been different election results, but it's an opinion I have held for the last 40 years. And I'm not interested in evidence to the contrary, frankly.
Well, you see, my view is that is where belief lives, in the world of opinion.
Yeah.
And once you have evidence, then there's no point having an opinion.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
So we don't have an opinion about gravity.
Exactly.
Yeah. There's evidence.
Yeah.
We don't have an opinion about evolution, and nobody should have an opinion about evolution.
No, indeed.
Yeah.
So I want to ask you about book publishing again, because it's my view that, as you said, the situation has moved on. Anybody now, it's very easy and it costs nothing. You can self-publish and design your own cover and just upload it, and there it is, and people have it, and they'll print one book when you get a sale, and that's how digital publishing works today. But it's my view that because authorship has become so easy, we now have a huge number of would-be writers, of creators of material, many more than there were back in the days of, let's say, Dickens again. But conversely, while that graph has been going up, ease of getting out there, ease of writing and publishing, on the other hand, the graph of readership has been going down, because what's happening is we're all becoming goldfish. We go around in our bowl and we have very short-term memory spans and very, very short attention spans. And we really want everything to be potted into a little few minutes. I mean, if you look at the algorithms of these videos, you'll find that people watch the first 8 minutes and then boink, they've had enough, and so this is what we're up against. Writership is going up, readership is going down.
My wife complains to me that I spend a lot of money on my books. I should think I spent over £1,000 getting it edited. I got it edited twice, and the first editor was pretty harsh and said, quite rightly, you need to do more research on police procedure, that my research on police procedure wasn't good enough. And a couple of other things she picked up. And so that cost me 750 quid to find that out. And then I didn't go back to her. She was too harsh. So when I'd done it again,
I went back to bowl.
I went to another editor who was very good again. And she said what some of my beta readers had said. She said, there's too much Omega course, there's not enough narrative. And my second editor said, put some of the Omega course in appendices at the end of the book. And then the reader can read it if they want to, or they can ignore it if they don't want to. And one of my daughters said to me, good idea, these appendices. No one will read them, but they'll look at it and think, wow, he's done his research.
Yes, exactly. I've got a book that's got almost as much appendices as it has narrative. And so the thing here is that with the diminishing readership, the problem is penetrating the potential audience. And so very often we might go to social media to try and raise the profile a bit. Are you trying to do that?
Yeah, I spend a lot of time on social media. Yeah, it's hard work, it's very hard to get notice and to sell.
Yes, indeed.
Yep.
Do you know? Sorry, do you know that in Chat GPT, if you upload your document to Chat GPT, it will give you a review, and they're brilliant. They're the review.
Oh wow! Because I used it to write my blurb.
Did you? Yes.
Well, I wrote a blurb and then I uploaded it to Chat GPT and said, write a blurb.
Yeah,
And
yes.
it did a more exciting blurb than my blurb.
Yes, it's very good. Yes. And when it gives you a review of your book, it does it in a few seconds. It's gone through, your 100,000 words and come up with an opinion about it just like that. And it reads very well. So I don't know whether that might be helpful if you're going through the traditional route and trying to get an agent again, show them this is what GPT says about me.
Mm.
Well, just to on the topic of AI, that's perfect timing, John, to get into AI 10 minutes with 10 minutes remaining of the show. I mean, really, you just have a knack for doing this. Have you tried, Paul, typing into ChatGPT, create a story with this storyline that addresses this and this, the history of Christianity?
Yeah, I'm kind of a bit dogmatic about that, I think I will be someone who will refuse to listen to music written by AI. And I will refuse to read a novel written by AI.
I probably would too, but it would be really, so on the topic of readership going down and authorship going up, do you foresee that we will be moving into a time where, unless many people think like you and I do, I don't even like AI art, the idea and artwork, it just does not, I would also not see that as...
I mean, it's a problem, isn't it? It's a problem.
I think it is. But
how can you tell? How can you tell
that's it.
Human creation from AI?
When you upload your book onto Amazon, you have to tick whether or not you've used AI to write the book.
Yeah.
And so, I'm quite happy to tick that I haven't. Occasionally, I've used AI in research. It's very, very good in research. You ask, I mean, when I started writing my first book, around about the millennium, I had to do some research. I had to go down to the library.
Yes.
And read the Times from a certain date. I remember I was doing research into ethnic violence in Azerbaijan, and I had to go to the library, read the Times from that date, photocopy it, bring it home. And then you got Google, where you could research anything and do it on Google. And now AI is much better than that. So interestingly, the Microsoft one is very dogmatic Christian. Go onto Microsoft Edge and ask their AI, who wrote the Gospels? And it will tell you Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And then if you scroll right down, it will say, but some scholars dispute this.
That's terrible.
It is terrible.
I think that's horrific because it's not accurate information.
Yeah, quite agree.
I'm shocked to the core right now. I'm really disgusted. So people don't use Microsoft AI because it's dogmatic Christian. It's terrible. I'm really disgusted now. I want to ask, what's the hardest part about the whole process of writing a book? What did you find to be the hardest part?
I would say two things. There were I think it was in my second book, I had to write a chapter about a fight at a wedding. I wrote, I think, about 8 versions of the chapter. I spent weeks and weeks and weeks on it, and I couldn't get it right. It just wouldn't go. So I turned it into 2 paragraphs, and it was fine. But one of the hardest things is letting go. You're with these characters day in, day out, week in, week out, and at a certain stage, you got to let them go. You got to say goodbye to them. And one of the troubles these days, you know, there was a time you publish your book and it was out and it was done, and the printer printed all the copies and they're done. Well, with Amazon these days, you can go back in and change it anytime you want.
I did not know
And
that.
yeah, and you know, it's happened to me. I think my second novel, a reviewer found 2 typos. And they contacted me and said that, you know, there's 2 typos here. So I just went in and changed them.
That's right. Yeah.
And you know, there's a bit of a perfectionist in me. I'm a bit too sloppy to be a real perfectionist, but there is a bit of a perfectionist in me that letting go is hard.
Yeah. Well, any creative process, the enjoyment comes from the creation.
Yeah.
So you don't want to stop, do you? You always want to, I'll just add a little bit more blue paint here. Or I'll get my chisel and chop a little bit more. Oh, oops, the arm fell off.
Well, there was someone, I can't remember if it was a poet or a painter or an author, who says you never finish your poem, your painting, your book. You abandon it.
Yes.
And it's true.
But,
you know,
Paul,
it'll do.
So as somebody who studied literature myself, I remember reading books like If on a Winter's Night a Traveller by Italo Calvino, and you know, the postmodernists, and the idea of intertextuality and intertexts has always intrigued me. And what I've often heard authors say, so I've never tried to write anything remotely fictional. Did you at times get the feeling, and I'm thinking back to some of the books that I've read, that the characters almost get a life of their own?
Oh yeah.
And how confusing is that to you? No,
in my
these
first
are my
book,
creations.
in my first book, there was a case where I wanted my central character to witness ethnic violence. He would witness a pogrom, and he would do nothing during the pogrom, and he would feel very guilty about having done nothing. And when I came to write it, he wasn't going to do nothing. He went and hid some people from the ethnic minority and put them under the bed in his house. And that's because that's what he would do. And then in the second novel, he was married, and there was another lady who he was becoming very fond of, and they didn't have an affair. And my agent said to me, "Make them have an affair. It's much better." And I thought about it. I thought, no, he wouldn't do that. So he didn't.
So he did. He made a choice that you wouldn't have made. Or that you wouldn't have had.
My agent persuaded me that it would be better for the narrative if he had an affair with this woman.
Yeah. But
when I came to write it, no, he wouldn't do that.
So I have to ask this, John. I have to ask Paul. Do you believe that we have free will?
That's a very difficult one. That is a very difficult one.
Oh, come on, you can do it in 1.5 minutes.
I've actually written a blog post about this.
Oh.
Yeah, my blog post, it has a thought experiment. And the thought experiment is this. Imagine Laplace's demon who knows everything about you. They know, everything you think, everything you feel. They know how your mind works. And this demon gives you a menu with 2 items on it and says you've got 1 minute to choose. And if you don't choose, you go hungry. And he's given you 2 items, both of which are equally appealing. Now, my theory is that in that situation, most of us are capable of going, well, I'll have that one, because you don't want to go hungry. And that this means that we have a limited ability to make choices, which is a very limited amount of free will. So I think we have a tiny bit. And I hope we have a tiny bit. I'm not certain.
On that note, now that we've solved now that we've agreed to solve that problem, you know, put
a
the
tiny
world
little bit.
on that issue, I've just got time to announce that next week we've got another very interesting guest who is actually something of an expert on AI, which we've just been talking about. And it's my New Zealand friend, Peter Harrison, who's a software engineer. He's currently working for a top secret New Zealand, I'm not sure how much I can say about it, but it's their space race department. And he's not allowed to give away anything because it's all, you know, of national
it's all black.
Oh, rugby reference. Oh dear. Yeah.
The New Zealand space program is all black.
Okay, if you say so. Anyway, join us next week to talk with Peter. What did I say his name was?
Harrison.
Yeah, Peter Harrison, my New Zealand friend. There you go. Paul, thank you very much. You've been wonderful.
Thank you very much. It's been fun. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Paul. It's lovely to meet you.
Yeah, nice to meet you too.
Say goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.